Hey, good morning, everybody. HR Fest Online again. Today, again with an amazing guest, John Younger. Hey, John.
Nice
From
to
the
see
US.
you.
And I think
Very exciting for me.
that is going to set the mood. John, you are an amazing person. You are a founder, you are a consultant, you are teaching, you are a regular contributor to all kinds of interesting outfits like Forbes and stuff. Amazing. Tell us very shortly what you are, if you
Thank,
can summarize it.
thank you, thank you. You know, I I I discovered it's a short story, but I like to tell it. I was invited to do a strategy project for HR for a very large pharmaceutical distributor called McKesson here in the States. And McKesson asked me if at the end of the study to please describe the 3 or 4 things that I found in this review that they thought would be most interesting. And I said, well, the most interesting thing for me is that 30% of the employees of this company are not employees. They are freelancers. And HR is not interested in them, doesn't know about them, and doesn't care about them. HR loves only full-time employees. But when you have 30%, a third of your staff are not employees, maybe HR needs to make a different decision. And that was the beginning of my quest to understand freelancing in general. I understood my freelancing, but I didn't realize, as so many people didn't realize at the time, that this was the beginning of a worldwide trend. And we've seen what's happened with that trend as a result of the years, as a result of technology, and now most recently as a result of the pandemic. It's been quite a change since 2013 when I first did that study.
So do you think it is going to be a lasting change? Because I've spoken to many professionals, a lot from the US, and some of them, especially those from the freelancing side, they were not happy. They said, it is not yet a revolution. It's just people not working from the office, but it's not more than that yet.
Well, it depends on your personal experience, I guess. So one way to think about it is to say, what percentage of employees are doing something in the area of freelancing? They're doing a side gig or some version of activity outside their main job. When you add them together with the professional full-time freelancers, you get something, according to Upwork, slightly above 50%. That's a revolution. When 50% or more of the people, in this case, Upwork's data from the US, but we can do this much more broadly, and we'll talk about it as we go. We have gone from 7 to 8 million, according to Mary Meeker in the US, full-time, to about 3 times that with the addition of the Gen Zs and the millennials. So we have many more people doing it, many more people doing it full-time, and many more people doing it part-time. It is not a revolution of mind yet, but it's reaching the tipping point. And what we will see, what we will see, which is so interesting, and we'll see this again and again, COVID-19 has been tragic on many dimensions, but one of the things that it's done in an interesting way is to familiarize companies and governments with remote work. The impact is huge because it's not just that more people are going to be working remotely and that more organizations are comfortable with that. It's that when you work remotely, the difference between being a full-time employee and a freelancer gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And we are discovering that freelancers can be just as productive, just as loyal to the project, just as concerned with making sure that things go well as a full-time employee. Thirdly, we also know that young people, at least pre-COVID-19, were moving quite quickly from their organizations. The average tenure was about 18 months, and people would get very frustrated if they weren't moving quite quickly. So now you have a situation where more people are freelancing, more people are remote, which means that the difference between freelancers and non-freelancers is getting smaller. And now you have employees that are turning over quickly. Tell me the difference between an 18-month employee and a freelancer. It's very hard to see it. So with all of these things, We are seeing a revolution of nature, of the nature of work, if I may put it that way. We're seeing a new type of work. But what we haven't gotten to is the mind meld at the full economy level. And that's the thing that perhaps many of the people that you've been talking with are feeling, that we haven't gone over the hill to really recognize and feel comfortable with this new world of work, this new nature of the workforce. And that will take some time, but it's something that will follow rather than precede the actual revolution itself.
It is so true, because I still get lots of questions from all kinds of HR leaders when talking about this topic of, but where is the boundary between the organization and the freelancer? And how I'm going to protect. So all these things you are talking about, which are proven to be handled very well by freelancers, or there are very good tools or ways to do that. They are still, so I believe that we still need, or how many years do you believe that these HR professionals will get used to that and we'll try to practice it and then leave it out?
Yeah, I will answer in two ways. One general, one specific. If I might tell you a story. My wife and I'm 68. My wife might be 68 some days, but normally she feels 39. And I will go with that number because I love her dearly. And so we were talking last week about our retirement, because we did retire. I write and I speak and sometimes I consult, but mostly I'm retired and enjoying my grandchildren and time in the country. But what we realized, she and I, my wife Carolyn and I, was that we needed to make a change, that we were shifting from acquiring things to experiencing things. And so we are letting go of a lot of our possessions that were wonderful to find and collect, but we're in a different place in our life right now. And so we need to think less in terms of stuff and more in terms of how we enjoy our next 20 years or whatever is left to us. Take that and apply it to the freelancing situation. It's going to take a generation for HR people to feel comfortable with a new type of workforce. And we've been calling it the flexible blended workforce. And what it means is that realistically, do we need all of these people to be full-time? Do they need to be full-time? What people want is a decent life, some security, financial and health-related security. And if they're fortunate to have interesting work and the opportunity to do a variety of interesting things. Let's focus on that. Whether or not we're talking about freelancers or employees, we know that we want to give people a living wage that works for them. We know that we want them to continue to grow and develop as human beings because it helps us in every sphere of life, from work to politics to family. And we know that we want people to be secure in their belief that they are respected as individuals. We can do all of that within the flexible blended workforce. The era of full-time employment, I believe, is coming to a close. And I believe it's coming to a close not because it's a bad thing, but because there are better options out there for people. And we are seeing that starting to develop. But will it take HR some time to think about a new mission? Absolutely. What you are seeing in some freelance organizations like TopTal, I will use that as an example because they do a nice job and they are very deeply involved in parts of Eastern Europe, which is important, I think, for your audience. They have redefined HR as community. So instead of thinking about human resources and imagining that the job is 70% administrative and 30% human to human, let's turn that over. And as a community organization, TopTal is spending time putting meetups together, not facilitating performance management. They can do that in a different way. Not facilitating compensation. They can do that in a different way. But the community organization is connecting people within the platform, helping people to know what they need to do to grow and develop and to stay future-proof in their career. That's the real focus of HR for the future. So one of the things that we ought to think about is perhaps a redefinition and a reorganizing of HR. We can take the administrative stuff and it can be done better by other groups. It can be done cheaper by other groups. It can be done on an AI basis without individuals in most cases. Let's focus the quote human resource specialists on the areas that are most important in human resources. And those are helping people to grow, to engage them, to ensure that managers know how to manage them effectively, etc. I believe that the freelance revolution and the blended flexible workforce forces a revolution in HR. And I think it's a good idea, not because HR is bad, but because there is more left to our life in HR than we have currently experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. I've read one of your articles and I liked a lot that you said that people or companies or HR department, whatever you take, should start taking their talents not as an inventory, but as an asset.
Yes, it's the most important asset. And we sometimes in freelancing forget that in the big platforms. We think that if we have, well, let's use the example. Upwork has 20 million people in freelancing, on their freelancing platform, 18 to 20 million people. That would make it what? Within the top 100 countries? We know that freelancer.com has 34 million people on their platform. That puts them at number 42 among countries in the world. It's slightly bigger than Saudi Arabia. Why do they need 34 million people? What we know is that freelancers want 4 or 5 things. The first thing that freelancers want is they want interesting work. They want to be able to support themselves and their families. Second, they want the opportunity to pitch for other interesting work, and they want the platform to support that for them. Third, they want help in managing their business. These are not just professionals, they are solopreneurs. They are people who are building businesses that may be just them or maybe a small group of individuals putting together a team. And the fourth thing that they want is help in staying relevant, help in staying up to sort of what's new, what's happening, really being future-proofed, as we like to call it, in their career, in their profession. And the 15th thing that they want is to feel like they're part of something, to feel related to people, to feel connected to a larger community. That community can be the freelancers, it can also be the organizations for whom they work as freelancers. If platforms, if marketplaces do these 5 things, they will succeed. Whether they have 1,000 people on their platform or 34 million. People do want to feel a part of something and important and growing. And that we can provide individuals, whether they're working for big corporations or they're working for small platforms.
And so what do you think? There are platforms already. Some of them are really huge, like you said.
Many, that's right.
But
almost 1,000 out there.
And that's the question. Will one of them emerge as being the platform, or will there be a lots of specialized platform? Because working freelance way is works very well non-digital. So basically, you get most of your contracts via social leads.
Yes, yes, Gergely, it's the data says under 10% is what you get through the funnel. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, it's a wonderful question. Let me try to give you a sense of the geography of freelancing. It's kind of cool. So that the first thing is that there are 3 or 4 types of organizations by size. So size is an important factor. You've got the freelancer.coms and the Fivers and the Upworks, and they're in the millions. Then you have very large regional groups. A regional group that would be a good example is a group like Juno. in the UK. It would be Expert 360 in Australia. It would be Flexing It in India. It would be Worksome in the UK and in the Nordics, etc. So there are numbers of these platforms that have 30, 40, 50, 60, but less than 100,000 people. And they tend to do quite well. They tend to provide a significant percentage of their folks because many of them are independent management consulting sites, not only tech sites. So a lot of their work is for other consultancies, for the PwCs and the McKinseys, et cetera, et cetera. Then you've got more focused sites that are smaller still, but tend to be clear about the areas that they serve and don't serve. Whereas in an Upwork, you have 2,000 categories. And in many of the large regional ones, you have hundreds of categories. But when you get down to the next level, which is kind of 1,000 to 10 or 20,000, really 1,000 to 10,000, you start to become more specialized. You start to focus on either management consulting or tech or agency work or something else. And then you have some quite small and focused sites that are very clearly emphasizing one area and very often one industry. So for example, there is a place in London called Collabtree, a platform that only serves the R&D community. They are PhDs in a variety of fields. There's another one called Lifeside Hub in the US, which is focused on, very important for the COVID-19 stuff, they're focused on clinical trials project management. They're project managers for clinical trials. That's what they do. And then you have a variety of others. I mean, my personal favorite is that in India, there is a site that has about 400 caricaturists. And I love that. Isn't that fantastic? What's wonderful about these platforms is that they really can scale from huge down to quite small. And then what you have secondarily, if so, size is one factor, then the second factor that you started to hear me talk about is focus. And you'll see quite a range of focus. In some areas, we only work with the architects and construction managers. In other areas, we only work with the salespeople. In other ones, we only provide ASAP. We only provide executive coaching. Third dimension. Am I talking too fast? This is okay? Okay, good. My wife says I talk too fast. There's a third dimension. And the third dimension is the degree to which they use different types of technology to match the client company or the customer company with the client freelancer. And so you see some groups essentially saying, we are small enough so that it's a very personal match. I know what my freelancers are good at and not as good at. I know what kinds of companies they work at well and what they don't. There are others that have used traditional competency measures and competency data, so surveys type stuff. There's a third kind, which is collecting data using AI support. And the fourth is blockchain. And blockchain is getting very interesting because it allows you to think in terms of a more comprehensive identity wallet that includes all of the factors. If you think about the essence of performance management, Gergely, and you know this better than I do, I mean, there is something wrong about performance management that's not inclusive, where it's only your boss's view or the selection of comments from others by your boss, right? It's a very colonialist system when you think about it. We are moving from colonialist to full stack. And what happens is that you're allowed through the Bitcoin and the new technology, the blockchain technology, to collect all of the factors, both the soft skills and the hard skills, both the experiences that in one company, but also the experiences in another. You can provide much more of a full view. So you're seeing three dimensions: size, focus, and matching connectivity. as three of the important ways in which things are changing. There's a fourth way, and it's referenced by your mention of the article from yesterday, and that is that part of the problem with freelance sites is that they're like cameras with small apertures. Something comes in, and then the job is to distribute it in some way to their freelancers. But you said something before that was very important, and that is that less than 10% actually comes through the transom. 90% comes through relationships. So what we're seeing more and more of these platforms do, companies like Contra in the US, companies like Venture L in Singapore, what we're seeing, and Brain Trust in the US, what we're seeing is that they're shifting in a very interesting way. And as a result of what they're doing, it's going to become a lot easier to make these connections between freelancer to freelancer. And that's where the tremendous power is. If you start thinking about a freelance platform not as an inventory, but as a community of communities, then what we want to do is we want to help people to help each other. And as they share their references, as they bring other people in, you can create a much more active and successful platform versus some of the biggest platforms, which realistically only give less than 10% of their platform members any work at all. In Upwork, in Freelancer, in Fiverr, it's less than 5%. So we've got to do a better job at creating these communities and communities, thinking less about hub and spokes, the traditional model, and more about how to get people working together to help one another is going to help build the freelance franchise quite nicely.
And that is what happens now. And I think that's why you are so energized, and it's so good to feel this energy, because we are right at the breakthrough of redefining work completely, and it is building in front of our eyes, and it's such a, and maybe we are even part of it, or some of us.
Well, it was the tech, right? I mean, the tech made it possible.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I mean, I've been a freelancer on and off for 35 years. My last job as a freelancer was as the freelance senior vice president of HR for the fourth largest bank in the United States, and I worked half-time. So I had what we call a portfolio career. Half of my time was at the bank, the other half was freelancing, and we're going to see more of those kinds of relationships, of course. What my family wanted to know was that there was a base of income sufficient to meet our needs, to feed us, to pay for our mortgage, etc. And that was the half-time job. And then the rest of it is, let's find work that's interesting, let's find work that's growthful, let's find work that's important. But I didn't have the benefit at that time of a platform to support me, or the technology support to engage with colleagues. It just wasn't the same way. So I'm very excited for the freelancers of today. It was not as easy before. It's a lot easier now, and it's a lot more exciting now.
Absolutely. And you know, I thought a lot always that when we look back in the past centuries, we always find it difficult. Hey, how come they treated those slaves like that? And you don't understand it. And I was always wondering, what will 2020 or 200 say about us? And you know what I think they will say about this age? They will say that was the age when there were still many people not liking their jobs.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's a very interesting thing. Part of what happens when you start to think freelancer is that, and this is, excuse me for making this a generalization, because generalizations are always problematic. But what we know about freelancers is because they live in a market world, because they have to successfully sell, they are much more attuned to the realities of their situation. They're much more attuned to the need to network. They're much more attuned to the need to stay up to date technically and in performance terms. They're much more likely to be involved in courses that bring that. They actually 66% versus 50% in the case of, freelancers versus employees, are focused on their own curriculum for development. And you see all of these measures that say that as solopreneurs, we feel a greater responsibility to keep ourselves up to date and high performing, because we must. That kind of attitude, if we can bring it into the workplace through part-time freelancing, through side gigs that employees get, it tends to change the atmosphere completely.
Absolutely.
Now, our organization's open to those side gigs. Well, we're seeing more and more openness to them, but there's still this, again, there's this indentured philosophy that says, if you're my employee, then I own you. I own all of your time. Well, that's not true. You bought 8 hours of my time per day for 200 days. That's all you bought.
Exactly. So if everything happens like that, and it's, the world is going into this direction, then it's going to be a completely different, much more happier, much more empowered world. Do you think there is a limit to this? So is there a limit to the kind of jobs that can be done in a freelancing way? Do you
I'm
think
sure there is.
type of personality that is, you know, for them it's, hey, don't go to that direction?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It's a wonderful question, and let's see. Let me try to answer it in a different way. I think more and more of us, and I hope this is an answer to your question. If it's not, I will do better. But I think that more and more of us feel like freelancers light. I don't know exactly how to describe what I mean by that. If you take a look at the meaningful work literature, they say that 3 things matter. First thing that matters is, and this is research that's about 15, 20 years old by Edward Dietschy and some other folks that really talk about kind of how to have a meaningful life. What are the elements that cause professionals to believe their life has meaning? One is autonomy. The feeling that I have some choice, I have some agency over my life, and therefore I feel some flexibility to make the decisions that are correct for me. So the first is autonomy. The second is competence. I'm good at something. And the third is relatedness. I am part of something. So interesting. I have some freedom. I have some agency. I have some skills that make sense and are valued in the world. And I am part of something that means something to me. Can more and more people get that and be freelancers? And the answer is yes. So what we are dealing with is the reality that in the old world, we experienced our competence and our relatedness through our jobs, our full-time employment, and we were willing to give up a little bit of autonomy in order to do that. What people are saying these days is maybe we don't have to give it up. Maybe we can get some of all 3 and still be able to bring home the bacon, so to speak, for our families.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
It's a bit more an honest word, no? Because previously we acted like, everybody had to act like they love their jobs, they love their bosses, they love their companies, they had to act like, and the less acting there is, the more people find themselves, and then they have the courage to find themselves, which I think is probably the toughest job.
I hope. I mean, if this increases authenticity in a world that desperately needs authenticity, that is a wonderful fringe benefit. That is a wonderful fringe benefit. What it does, though, is it makes it if the combination of technology and freelancing makes one thing tough, and that is, how do I plan my life? It's easier to plan. My father, and I miss him terribly. My father, for his life, had 2 jobs. The first job was a commercial job, and he was somewhat successful. And then he got a job in government, and he spent the next 30 years in the Treasury Department of the United States. And he felt all of those things. He felt the competence, he felt the relatedness, and he felt as though he had some of the autonomy that he needed in order to do things. He enjoyed his work, and that's fabulous. But we live in a world where fewer and fewer people are going to have that experience or that opportunity. And so within that, we've got to find some change. So how do you find change in a situation where the half-life of technology and therefore the half-life of competence is shrinking? You know, I did some research on this stuff. In HR, the half-life of competence is about 5 to 10 years. That means within 10 years, a new graduate knows 50% of what I know, which is no longer relevant, right? I mean, so they bring a new world. In tech, it's 3 to 5 years. In medicine, it's 18 months to 3 years. In cybersecurity, it's less than a year. I mean, so we live in a world where my father's opportunity just doesn't exist anymore. You can't just have 2 jobs. You can't continue to work for the next 20, 25 years in an area hoping that it will not change so appreciably, so significantly that you can't keep up. But it is. And as it changes, 2 things happen. One is we've got to figure out what our next gig is, what our next act is, what our next career is. And the second is our organization has to think about what skills are going to be needed in the future that they can't train me to go from here to there. No matter what happens, the reality is I am not going to be a cybersecurity specialist, and I'm not going to be able to manage them either. So we need more movement in our organizations as the tech changes, as the half-life of skill changes. Organizations have to respond. They can respond in part through education, but the other part they need to respond in terms of is creating more flexibility, more blending in that workforce. So it's happening. It's got to happen. Organizations aren't dumb. They've got to operate as economic entities. So yeah. we've got to figure out how we're going to respond in terms of that.
Just one last question, because it's such an interesting conversation that we are very.
Oh, I'm just a big mouth. I know that. But thank you.
Really good. You keep me entertained. But that's the question I have. Because what you said, that let's be honest, John, you are a freelancer. You were a freelancer years before the revolution. You would have been a freelancer whatever happened. I am a freelancer because this is our calling, and you and I, we are all surrounded by like-minded people, but we are a certain percentage of the population who would anyway move into that direction. The question is, what about those? So we love this new word, excellent. But if the word speeds up and the half-lives go down, and then basically every employee is kind of forced to look for the gig. Maybe not everybody is happy about that, so how do you think about this? Do you think everybody will have to learn this competence, or there will be some who will say, hey, I am trying to find a job that's for life, even though that might not be possible, or how?
I think we're going to see a lot of stuff is one way to say it. So let me describe some of the pieces. And I'm sure that many of the people listening to this or watching this interview will have better ideas than I do. So please excuse me for the limit of my imagination on this. One thing that's important is that we give people skills at staying up to date in what's happening in the world. The very first step in all of this is people staying current in terms of their understanding of what's happening. That's the first. Second is we need to create more skill at life coaching all over the place. It's got to slosh all over. I believe deeply that one of the consequences of COVID-19 is that the task of managing people is changing. What you need to do to be good at it is different when you're in a distributed remote environment than when you're in a full-time office environment. It's a different deal. And so we're going to have to provide managers with the skills to help their people to understand what my what my friend Paul Thompson calls the mirror of reality. You know, one example of this many years ago is that I got a call from Honeywell Bull, which made mainframe computers for most sovereigns. And they said, we have 500 power systems engineers, and we don't need power systems engineers anymore. What do we do? More organizations are going to experience that kind of stuff. And we need to help organizations, both in HR and in management, to know how to deal in advance with these kinds of situations rather than waiting until it's too late. Third thing that's going to be important is that we have to give people the community connections that make it possible for them to learn from and benefit from one another. You know, my daughter-in-law has recently moved. She's a PR specialist. She's wonderful public relations specialist. Her name is Natalie Hall Younger. She is moving from, or she has moved recently from Florida to the Bay Area. She is moving in her work in PR from fast fashion, where she was the head of PR for a very nice label, to technology. It's a whole new world. She's got to reconnect with a whole bunch of different people. So part of my job over the last few months has been to help her to be introduced to people in the tech world so that she can begin to be productive in that environment. So we have to do that as well. So helping them to see where the world is going, helping managers to give people a better sense of what their future looks like, what reality means in terms of their current endeavors, their current occupation, and helping people to build those networks so that they can stay fresh, stay connected, and stay competent. Those are some of the things that we can do to help people to figure out their place. But I think what we know is that there will be a lot of people that feel very comfortable and a lot of people that feel very uncomfortable. And we have to provide support for both.
Which is also a business opportunity.
Yes, always, always.
Exactly. John, it's gonna be a hell of a ride because I wanted to make a joke on your name, you see, and then because I hate if people make jokes on names, but your name Younger is
I'm working on it.
Just radiating from you. So thank you very much. I believe those who listen to us, they had quite a lot of food for thought for their summer weeks.
Oh, I'm delighted. I'm delighted. And please invite me again. This was fantastic. You guys are doing great stuff.
It's good to talk to you. You made our day already sunnier and happier, but with a lot of very, very, very deep thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks, Gregory.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Take care. Bye-bye. See you next time, and thanks for your audience.
Be safe.